All right, so we are going to be in Mark chapter 12 this evening. And just as a reminder, we're basically doing a chapter a week. And so we're in chapter 12. And last week was a little bit of a change in that, and through Jesus's teachings and through the miracles and kind of all the wandering around he was doing on the north side of the Sea of Galilee. Last week he turned towards Jerusalem, and one of the things that we talked about was that when he decided to go to Jerusalem, um, he knew that it was a very dangerous move, and so did everybody with him. The religious leaders who were very unhappy with him, their headquarters is in Jerusalem. And so when Jesus makes that turn, that's kind of the theological term that scholars use. Jesus turns towards Jerusalem. I don't know, as soon as he decides to go to Jerusalem, things are about to get pretty antsy and anxious because it's dangerous, and everybody around Jesus knows it, and Jesus, of course, himself knows it as well. And last week, in chapter 11, when he goes into the temple, there's a couple of things going on that really upsets him. And the first thing is that people are selling things and taking advantage of regular old folks. And the things they're selling are things that you need in the temple. The Jewish people needed sacrifices. And so when they would come in from whatever other territory and they needed a couple of turtle doves for their sacrifice, they needed to get them somewhere, and getting them from the temple appears to be just fine. The problem that Jesus has is that the people who are selling those are taking advantage of the customers. And that the customers, the Jewish people, are paying way too much money for something that they shouldn't have to pay for. At least not that much. It's not that Jesus is against making a living. That's not the case. It was just exorbitant. And the second thing that he was very upset about was he was upset that the people, when they needed to exchange their money, because the Roman currency, the denarius, that's the typical currency of the day, and it's got the picture of Tiberius Caesar on the coin. We're going to talk about that here in just a little bit. When you came in with your Roman money, in order to pay the temple tax, in order to pay your tithe, you had to pay it in a shekel, in Hebrew money. So you'd bring in your Roman money and you'd go over to the money changer, and they would swap it out for the shekels. And those people were also taking too much of an advantage of the regular public. And because these two things, these merchants are out there and it's in the open court, which Hebrew and non-Hebrew, men and women, all people can go into that court. Instead of the church being a safe place, it was a place of profit and of greed and of jealousy and of different things like that. And that's what upset Jesus. He turns over the money changers temple tables, and in the midst of that, there's the cursing of the fig tree. But when he turns over those tables in the temple, that really sort of seals the deal from the religious authority standpoint. They know that they have to get rid of this guy before it gets any worse. And I say get any worse because Jesus is not there. He's not of their lineage. He is not somebody that they have trained. He is not somebody that they feel they can rely upon. He kind of came out of nowhere. And according to their tradition and their believing, you had to come up through the ranks. You should be of somebody of royal priestly lineage, somebody that they already know, somebody that's been through all of their schools and all of their training. This is somebody that kind of comes out of nowhere. And the people are claiming that Jesus is the Messiah. And having the Messiah present, I don't think is the issue as much as that it's Jesus. And that's why the authorities don't like it, is that this is somebody they don't know, somebody who is from a very poor stock. That's not supposed to be the case. From somebody who's very humble beginnings. It's not supposed to be that way. They think it's supposed to be all royal, high and mighty sort of thing. So that's when Jesus comes into Jerusalem with the disciples and with his followers, and these things start taking place. And Jesus gets upset, and they really buckle down to try to find a way to entrap Jesus. And the easiest way to do it and not get blood on your hands is to get him to is to be able for him to commit a crime, for Jesus to commit a crime against the state of Rome, and just take religion completely out. But what if they can get him to say something or do something that is contrary to the belief of Rome, in which case that could yield that's how you can get rid of Jesus. And the religious authorities can be just taken out of it. They don't, their hands are not dirty that way. And so that's why they're always trying to trap him. And this indeed happens in chapter 12 as we begin. Now, as we begin chapter 12, one note, he is in the temple when he is teaching these things. Okay. So this is a continuation of chapter 11. So Jesus is in the temple with his followers and with everybody else, Jews, Greeks, men, women, anybody can be there. So chapter 12, beginning in verse 1.
Pastor,
Yes,
could I ask a question?
sure.
Why was it okay with the authorities that the money changers and the people selling the animals and birds were taking advantage of people?
Because they're probably making money off of it.
Oh.
The church, let's take it from, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say they're completely honest. The church is probably charging rent to those money changers. Hey, if you're
Mm.
going to set up a table in my thing, you need to pay the church a fee. And but it's probably very likely that that's not the only fee they're paying. They're probably paying a fee to a specific individual or a specific committee or group of individuals. So somebody is making money off the deal, not just the merchant.
Somebody's
Thank you.
making a cut.
Yeah. Everybody's getting their cut, and that's what and it's we know the same thing. If you're in the airport and you buy a soft drink in the airport, it's going to be $5, and you could get the same soft drink at 7-Eleven for half that. You can get at Publix even cheaper than that. So it's the markup because everybody has to be paid, and that's what
Or
we.
could it even be Joe, the priest over in the little village over? It's his brother selling the doves on the side
Sure.
because he asked his brother, the priest, hey, can I sell my doves for the folks that are showing up at the last minute?
Yeah, there's all kinds of there's all kinds of scenarios that are really pretty easy to see. It's just kind of using our imagination. So after all this kind of takes place, Jesus is still in the temple teaching, and that's where chapter 12 begins. So verse 1, chapter 12, and I'm going to be reading from the New Revised Standard, and I'm also going to switch to the NIV partway through. Then Jesus began to speak to them in parables. So this is a story, okay? This is not a actual event. A man planted a vineyard and put a fence around it. He dug a pit for the wine press and he built a watchtower. Then he leased it to the tenants and he went to another country. So the reason this is kind of interesting is that this is very common in first century Palestine. Is that the owners of the property may not be farming it themselves. And of course, that happens in America all the time. It used to happen all the time where the owners were not the ones farming it. It's actually somebody else, tenant farmers, who actually do that. And this is the case that's happening here. Verse 2. And when the season came, he, and that is the landowner, sent a slave to the tenants to collect from his share of the produce of the vineyard. But they seized him, beat him, and sent him away empty-handed. And again he sent another slave to them. This one they beat over the head and they assaulted. Then he sent another, and that one they killed. And so it was with many others. Some they beat, and others they killed. And he still sent another one, a beloved son. And finally, he sent the beloved son to them, saying, they will respect my son. But those tenants said to one another, this is the heir. Come and let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. And so they seized him, killed him, and threw him out into the vineyard. What then will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the tenants and give the vineyard to others. Have you not read this scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is amazing in our eyes. And when they realized that he had told this parable against them, they wanted to arrest him, but they feared the crowd, so they left him and they went away. So there's a lot of interesting stuff, because this is just a story. This is a for example sort of thing. And we preachers are always using for example, trying to find some kind of way, like other than biblical talk, to like get your attention and stuff, or to get our attention, or to try to keep people from sleeping. And this is one of those stories. And he's telling a story that's a pretty common thing that happens in tenant farming. But in this case, it seems to be a little bit different. And so if we look back at the story, and this is this is verses 1 through 12, and looking at this whole story, we've got several groups. We've got we have a landowner, we have the tenant farmers, we have, in my texts, in both the NRSV and the NIV, mine says slaves that the owner is sending to collect the money. And then we have a beloved son. So we've got several different groups of characters, or several characters in the story. And I think a good way to kind of just open this discussion is to kind of talk about how these characters play out. So let's talk about this, for instance. In the story, as Jesus has presented it to us, who wins in this situation? You've got the landowner who sends slaves to collect his payment of the crops. The tenant farmers abuse the messenger. What's that?
Nobody wins.
Nobody wins. So if nobody,
the people that he's going to give it to instead of the tenants,
yeah,
whoever they are, will be the winners.
Okay. So there's some potential winners, but we don't really have, they're not in the story yet, right? So there are some potential winners, but at least in the story, the way it's presented, it doesn't look like there are any winners. So does that mean that everybody in this story loses?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we have no winners, because sometimes you can have no winner and it be a tie. I mean, I don't know why that happens in some sporting events, but it does. There should be no column for a tie. That should never, ever, 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 ever happen. And so, but in this case, there's not only no winner, but it's everybody loses. And so the tenant farmers, who are sort of in control of the immediate situation, they're the ones who are sort of directing the action. And then the landowner responds based on their action. So who are all these people? Who is the landowner? So, and because if we're trying, because now I'll back up. Remember the last part of this story is that the people who are trying to trap Jesus, when Jesus tells this story, they immediately know that he's talking about them. Now,
Yeah.
we're not.
In my Bible, if we look at the last verse of 33, they're messing with him. And then they play stupid in verse 33 of chapter 11. And they say, well, we don't know. And Jesus says, well, neither will I tell you. Verse 12, and he began. So it's like an immediate response to their playing stupid, like they don't know.
Right.
taught them, and they play like they're ignorant, and that's when he starts this.
Yeah, but and I think one of the interesting, to me, this is interesting because when I read this story, it's a little, it's not so obvious to me, but it appears to be clearly obvious to the authorities because they immediately know, and so that's so if they immediately know that it's against them, then how are who are they in the story?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
I
mean,
think they're the vine growers. They're the ones that are supposed to be doing something. They've been entrusted. It makes me think of, little children, and somebody's acting up, and you say, "Oh, I sure would hate it if somebody was talking while the teacher was and didn't get to go out to recess." Not that that ever happens in my world, but yeah, that's what it reminds me of. Jesus kind of is saying, "Oh, well, you didn't understand what I was saying. Okay." And he's turning to the followers, the faithful, disciples, and all these people following him around. He says, there was a man who trusted all that he had to some people and believed that they would take care of it. And you know what? They were beating up on people and taking advantage of people. What do you think the owner's going to do when he comes back around? And that's how I see it playing out. Like Jesus is kind of poking at those religious leaders.
okay.
Holding.
Okay.
Outright.
Okay. So if the religious leaders are the tenant farmers, if they're the ones who are in charge of the farm and they're supposed to grow this, and the way that they treat the messengers, who are the messengers potentially in that story, in the context of what you just said? Because
Reformers?
I think the people who come to collect the money, the people who work for the landowner, who come to collect the money for the landowner.
Could it be prophets from the past?
Prophets? Okay, it could be prophets from the past, sure, in which John the Baptist would be considered one that they killed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because not all of them did they kill.
No,
yeah,
I think it could be going even back in time, going back into the Old Testament. God kept sending all these prophets saying, repent and turn back, repent and turn back. And then, so many others, it says verse 5, and so with many others, beating some and killing others. And then he had one more to send.
Okay.
Yeah. Jesus.
Okay. So if we want to take it from that standpoint, that God is the landowner and that it's the religious leaders who are the tenant farmers, and Jesus is being that only son, what do we learn about the character of, let's start with God. If God is the patience, okay, what else do we learn about the characteristics of the landowner?
Well, then, as it unfolds, revenge.
Revenge, meaning?
Well, after this was all done, he said, who will be the owner of the vineyard? Or what will he do? He'll come and destroy the wine dressers and give the vineyard to others.
Okay.
So he'll take his retribution
Okay.
for what they've done.
Okay. And what did they do?
They beat and killed the people that he sent to collect what was his.
Okay. The people, plural, not just one or two, but lots.
It sounds like it was all of them.
Yeah, it was a lot of people, seems like, right? And so he's somebody who will take retribution potentially. Of course, he's the landowner, so it's his right to do so. In fact, at the beginning, he's the landowner and he's the one that plants the crops, right? Sets everything up, fences it in, puts in the watchtower. And so, I mean, did he really need to lease it to somebody else? Could he have not just had his own crew take care of it? His own.
Patient. He is hoping that all, that they come around. And he's given them chance after chance to be worthy of that trust.
Okay, so trust is a big part of it because he gives them the keys. And he's expecting them to be and hoping that they're completely fair, at least. I mean, it's not that there doesn't seem to be any discussion about whether or not they were good farmers. This isn't like the story where the rich person gives slaves, gives them a different amount of money and then goes away, and one of them invests it and one of them puts it in the bank, one of them digs a hole in the ground. This isn't that case. This is that he fully trusts them, and he comes back, and what he's looking for is he's just looking for what it is that they're supposed to do. He fully trusts them. So if he's talking about the religious leaders, that's certainly a possibility. Who else could be considered as tenant farmers in this story? Could it be directed to another group of people?
Well, not in context.
Not necessarily in New Testament context. So if you had another context, would you be able to apply a different set of people to it?
I mean, I think you could. I think people like to take scripture out of context sometimes a little liberally, and will say, oh, America, or oh, this, people will try to read things into end of times or hurricanes and disasters and say, oh, this happened because America didn't do this, or this country has fallen from grace. But in context, it's talking, I believe, specifically about that God's elect at that time.
Okay.
God's elect, have they been obedient to what they've been entrusted with? And these are God's covenant people who were not honoring and being known by their love for others. They're beating people who are coming and bringing God's message, or coming with the word that the vine, that landowner has.
Right.
But I think that sometimes these are the places we take out of context. This is a specific story that Jesus tells. This parable is specific to what we just read in chapter 11. And I could be way off, but to me, he has a specific purpose for why he's telling this parable. And it's not necessarily for all time to mean everything bad that happens of destruction is because somebody did something bad.
I don't think that. I just think that there's a whole other group of people that this can refer to. Because if we do back up into context, and this is, let's say it's Tuesday of Holy Week, and he was just welcomed into town by the waving of branches and palms and all the crowds hollering for him, yay, 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 yay.
The faithful, right.
But by Friday, they're going to be asking for his crucifixion.
Right, the faithful, the elect, God's chosen.
Well, I think that there's potential that it's not just talking about God's specific chosen people to manage the church, as much as it also is to everybody who claims that they are part of God's people. Because the same people who are cheering Jesus on the way,
right? Sure.
Well, yeah. I mean, if
the Hebrew nation in that time in Jerusalem that week. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it can be religious authority, but it could also be the Hebrew nation. But if because somebody brought up Old Testament, if you go back and you say, hey, here comes the elect, the son, the heir to everything. There's an Old Testament connection to that too.
Right.
Hey, look, here comes that knucklehead Joseph. Let's kill him so that we don't have to deal with his. Does that make sense?
Yes, except
It,
did we read verse 12?
well, yes, we did. It's just that if Jesus is talking to a specific group of people in this context,
Because
specifically
verse 12, it's saying, and they were seeking, and yet they feared the multitude.
Yeah.
That's the priest. So
Yeah, the priests get the story. The people probably don't get the story. The general people. The priests get the story in part because this is a direct link to something that Isaiah talked about, when he was talking about something specific with Joseph and his brothers.
mine says in verse 12, he spoke the parable against them. I maybe I'm misreading that the them, the they in verse 12 is the priest.
Yeah.
So to me,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm being difficult.
Yeah. So it is absolutely possible that this is multiple different groups of people. This is not just an attack on leadership. And it's not necessarily attack on leadership as much as it is to try to open people's eyes. Because the thing is if I read this and I am I'm a pastor, so yes, I can look at this and say, okay, this obviously applies to me. But before I was a pastor, I could look at this and say, this has nothing to do with me. I have no play in this. There's no 2 cents in this story. Why would a preacher ever preach on it? Why would the church even care about this thing? Because it doesn't have anything to do with it except for priests. They should teach it in the seminaries and that be the end of it. But I don't think that that's how the Gospels were written. I don't think that that's how we have arrived at our canon scriptures, is that everything can absolutely be applied to all of us in some form or fashion, that we can all take something out of it. And I think at the kind of looking at it and saying, okay, the landowner obviously has extreme patience, has an awful lot of trust, is willing to try again and again and again and again to help his people do the right thing. And at some point in time, if they don't do the right thing, he is going to pull the plug. It's not a never-ending rainbow of Fruit Loops. There comes a time where the doors are closed, where the gates are closed. There's a time to where you have to make a decision, and if you don't, then there is another side to it. And of course, what the scripture says, it says that he's going to give it to somebody who will take it. So yes, he still has trust, he still has love for people, and if you are choosing to not, or me, if we are not choosing to be a part of it, that's on our own heads, because he's giving us enough chances to do it. So I think if you kind of take this and look, and we stack it in Holy Week with the cursing of the fig tree. One of the things on the fig tree that we talked about, Jesus, when he cursed the fig tree, it was not fig season. He was hungry. He went over there to it, and then the next day the tree is withered down to its roots. One of the things we talked about last week was is that the fig tree's job is to produce fruit, is to produce figs. And if it's not producing figs, then it's basically taking up nutrients from other people who should be producing figs. It's kind of like when we have weeds in our garden, there comes a time to where we're going to start pulling them up, because if we don't, they're sucking all the nutrients that we want our good plants to be able to have. And so with that being chapter 11 that leads right into this parable, and then goes one more time again in the context of the story, because we have another one coming. Because Jesus, he doesn't stop. These are all connected in the temple, and we expect them to be in Holy Week. So take a look at 13, verse 13. And then they sent to him some Pharisees and some Herodians to trap him in what he said. And they came to him and they said, Teacher, we know that you are sincere and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Should we pay them or should we not? But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, why are you putting, let's see, why are you putting me to the test? Bring me a denarius and let me see it. This is verse 16. And they brought him one. And then he said to them, whose head is this and whose title? And they answered, the emperor's. And Jesus said to them, give to the emperor the things that are emperors, and give to God the things that are God's. And they were utterly amazed at him. And so the issue here is a contextual issue, because if they can get Jesus to say that it is not lawful religiously for them to pay taxes to Caesar, then all the religious leaders have to do is go tell the authorities that Jesus is teaching to not pay taxes, and that's the end of Jesus. This is a real easy trap. The thing is that in Hebrew law, you're supposed to follow the rules, and paying a tax to a foreign ruler infers that you are participating or could be participating in something that is unlawful or ungodly. That's what the rule is. And so there is some absolute difference. Sorry, I'm up here at church and not love it. Okay. And so there's some background. And that's a big thing. Do we pay taxes or not? Because a lot of people didn't want to pay taxes. And so this was sort of the trap they set up. And Jesus really pulls something that we use when we do stewardship sermons. This is a good one. This is a real good one for us to use. So it's, whose money is it? Whose head is on the coin? And they say it's Caesar's, which of course we translate as government. Okay, well, give to the government what you're supposed to give to the government, and give to God what is supposed to be God's. Of course, what we know is that some governments take more money from us than others. Some of them have higher tax rates than others. And what if we don't agree with the tax rate that we're being charged? Can we rightfully find a way around it, or cheat in some form or fashion? And that's all kind of part of this thing. It's just as alive in our world today as much as it would have been back then. So comments, thoughts on paying taxes to Caesar, and on how this was received, how you've heard it maybe, how you've interpreted it maybe? Anyone? Oh, Marita, we can't hear you. I see you talking, but your mic is, it looks like it's on. And so I'm going to try to help a little bit and see. You're still on mute. I can see your mouth going, but it's just not coming through the microphone. And it shows your microphone is clear. So I don't know if maybe the volume of the mic is turned off or not.
Is the volume on your phone down?
No, but yeah, we still can't hear Marita. We can see you talking, but we can't hear it. So,
Oh,
oh, okay. So,
Oh,
well,
write it, Marita, write it.
I get, I just said, I get this question all the time. And the question I get all the time is that when I tithe, tithing meaning 10% of what we have, that's the biblical tithe. Goes all the way back to Abraham, goes way on back. We're supposed to take 10% of what we receive and give it back to the church. Then the church takes it and then distributes it to everybody. And so part of the easy math in that is that if you're a fisherman, you give 10% of your catch to the church. Why does a church want fish? Well, because the farmer who's growing wheat, he doesn't have fish. And so he gives 10% of his wheat, and then the fisherman can have wheat and the farmer can have fish, and everybody, and you distribute it to everywhere. And in the midst of that, you keep your place of worship together. You pay your priests enough to have a place to live, or you build them a house, or however that takes place. But there is a big question out there among trying to be good, godly, successful business people, that when they tithe, do they tithe before tax or after tax? I have been asked that question 1,000 times probably in my career. I mean, it is constant, often. You'd be shocked, but it's real. It's real, because if the more money that you make, the more money now that you're giving away from some perspective. Not everybody looks at giving to the church as an investment into their spiritual life, or as an investment into their neighbors' lives, or an investment into their community. That's not the way that's viewed. Some people view it as, okay, this is my tax deduction, or okay, this is all I have to do to make sure that I'm a godly person or a righteous person. This is what I need to do to make me feel good about fulfilling God's requirements. And of course, Jesus, when he's telling the story, whatever the tax was, the Roman tax that the Hebrews had to pay, that the Hebrews hated to pay, they don't want to pay a tax to anybody. Nobody wants to pay a tax to anybody. Rome just happens to be that current foreign ruler, but they've had the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Egyptians. Everybody charges them a tax, and they don't like it. So that's not really that unusual. But the way that he frames it, give to Caesar what is Caesar and give to God's what is God's. How is that question answered? Or is it appropriate, or are we supposed to tithe before taxes or after taxes? That's the question.
Yeah.
Well, it's not based on your income, right? So it's like your gross income, that regardless of your taxes.
Well, a lot of people, Mara, are going to say that your income is what your pay is that comes in, because you can't spend what the government is taking.
Mhm.
And so if you made $1,000 and the government's taking 200 of it, then that's, you don't have any control over that. You have to do that. And it doesn't seem fair that I should have to turn around and give a full 200 to God as well, because now I'm down to $600. If I give 200 to Caesar and 200 to God, now I'm down to $600, and I need more than that to live.
Mm.
And we vote for the people who choose how much to tax us. But at this point in time, when this is being told, they were under a dictatorship and they had no say in how much their tax was. Oh my.
So this really is it's a big subject, and to me it's one that I found a way to resolve it for myself, but helping other people through this predicament, because the ones who ask this question are usually ones who are extremely well off, very, very blessed, because we're not just talking about them giving $200 you know, on a $2,000 paycheck. These are folks that are making a whole lot more than that. And then you get into the thing as well. I'm getting this was an inheritance and from my dad, and my dad already paid his tithes on it. He tithed before he put that in the investment account, and now it's this big. And so when it comes back to me, you know, I shouldn't have to pay taxes on it for sure, but of course you do. But I shouldn't have to tithe on it because it's already been tithed. And if I tithe on it now, I'm being double tithed because dad already paid it. Or we could even back it down and say, okay, well, this is my IRA and this is my investments, and I saved this my whole life and I've already tithed on it. So why should I have to tithe on money I've already tithed?
So the frame of mind is not what can I give, but
Ah,
what can I keep?
that's absolutely, Mara. That is very insightful because that's exactly what's happening. Is they're not thinking about it from the perspective of what you just mentioned. It's not about the giving; it's about the keeping. It's okay. I cannot upgrade my vehicle, my perfectly good vehicle, because now there's always times when we hit. I think I think there are times in life where we hit certain places and we're not able to do it. And I'm not talking like I didn't give my tithe this past Sunday because of the hurricane. Okay, and I still haven't given it. But the reason I haven't given it is because I don't have a place to take it. So if I give it to my business manager, she has to go into town because all the banks on the island are closed. And I'm more worried about her and I don't want her stuck in that traffic. But the thing is I know that on Sunday, this Sunday, I will make up for it. I will double down for it. And so it's not that sort of thing, but sometimes we hit financial problems and financial issues in life. But God gets that. You know, if we
Mhm.
come to a time period where we're in some kind of a severe financial crunch and we're being the best stewards we can, God doesn't expect us to give what we cannot give.
Mhm.
That's and I think that's such a big important part of this. It's not what I can uh, uh, it's not what I don't have. It's what I already have. And if the best I can do this week is this number, is 5%, or the best I can do this week is 2%. God gets that. He's God. God's not going to dock us, you know, with an X in a box, so that we get to heaven one day. That God, 18 times during your life, you chinched on your tithe. That's not what it's about. It's about giving from your heart, and some people um, can't just afford a whole lot, you know. And in fact, there's a story about a widow who comes up. Well, I'll be doggone. It happens to be in this chapter. Would you look at that? This whole story is in this. It's in verse 41. It's the last story in the chapter 12. Wow, I had no idea that these were in the same place. It says he sat, and this is verse 41 in chapter 12. He sat down opposite the treasury and he watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. That would be great to have the offering plate out front, like at the door. And like if I could sit over against a tree or like hide somewhere and watch, that would be pretty cool. That's what it looks like is happening. Verse 42, a poor widow came in and she put two small copper coins, which are worth a penny. And then he called his disciples and said, then truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, and she out of her poverty has put in everything she had, all that she had to live on.
Mhm.
In the grand scheme of things, those two copper coins or that penny is not gonna buy a roll of tape, gonna be barely buy a square inch of tape. But it's not about the amount.
Right.
It's about what's in here when we give. And I think it'd be interesting to know what was on this woman's heart and mind, what her concerns were, what was going on in her life at that time. That because if she gives all of her 2 copper coins this week, she won't have anything to give next week, right? If we give it all this week, we don't have anything to give next week. So what is it that's sort of going through her heart and mind? And it could be obviously there's a specific situation. There's something, and it could be a specific need at the temple. It could be that a neighbor's house burned down, and it's the church is helping support, and she wants to help support them. It could be that there's some tragedy that happened in her life. It could be that that day is a special day in her life. It could be a birthday or an anniversary or a special memory of someone that she dearly loves. It could be that that she is just in a spiritual place with the Lord, that she wants to be able to trust the Lord with everything, and she's willing to give it. And maybe for the last month, she hasn't given it all because she's been scared to let go of those last 2 pennies. And maybe after a month of worrying about it, or a month probably more likely of praying about it, that God has comforted her, and she got to a point to where she could give those 2 copper coins. We don't know what the mindset is and what the heart set is, but I don't think that matters really, because as long as she is giving out of the blessing that the Lord has provided her, and not because there's a tax deduction attached to it, and okay, and not because you're going to get your name put on a brass plaque on a wall, because you gave so much money that you get to name the place after yourself. It's not in churches. We're just notorious for that. Oh my goodness gracious! I mean, I I was at one church where every little thing, like all the old altar equipment, like a candlestick, and on the back of it would be engraved "Given by Jim Bob." I mean, every single piece. I'm like, yeah, they probably spent more money on engraving their names than they did on buying the candlestick in the first place.
I know of a church where a church member has a big sign like next to the handicap parking, the same size, a steel sign says "reserve parking for Mrs. Blah Blah," because she gave so much money.
Oh, they like they do at school, where you can they always sell that at the school auction, right? The best parking place.
Yes, except this wasn't auctions. This was just she had given so much and she bought her own parking place at the church by the front door.
That's a pretty good idea. I wonder how much I could get out of a parking place. So, and these are
Put the guy's name on it.
yeah.
It had her name on it, yeah.
Yeah, it's the financial piece is a really, really hard piece. And one of the things, and y'all are very much in the know of things. And the last thing that I wanted to do coming up this Sunday, and coming up in future times at the church, is make the people feel like, the congregation feel like I'm preaching for money.
Mhm.
I have to be highly sensitive to that. I don't want people to think that that's what it's about, except I know that there's extreme need. So I know what the need is, but I also know that I've got to be very careful in what and how I approach it, because there's going to be some folks who are going to be turned off. Look, all the churches does is talk about money and blah 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 and all that sort of thing. And for the most part, that's all nonprofits across the. I mean, that's the challenge of nonprofits. How do you raise money and how do you ask for money and do it in a creative way, in a way that gets people engaged? And when we're given to the Lord, it really it is a private thing. It is a personal thing, but really it should be a spiritual thing. I mean, it should be something that warms our hearts, um, that makes us not just feel God's presence, but be assured that we are being who God called us to be. And sometimes that does mean tightening the belt up. In my last church, lots of folks were not used to giving and had never been taught before on tithing and all that kind of things. And to me, one of the greatest illustrations is, hey, listen, at work you eat out, twice a week. I said, just eat out once a week. Back it down and just eat out once a week and give that other, if it normally costs you $10 to eat out or $15 to eat out, give that to the church, but just cut back one of them and give that to the church. And just that little amount makes a difference, but it helps to kind of paint a sacrifice, because you come to the point to where I want pizza. I don't want a peanut butter and jelly sandwich today. I want pizza. Like, well, for some people, that's a big sacrifice for them to say, you know what, I think I will have peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I can go without pizza this week, and I think I can give that to the church. That's a big step for some people. That's a big step. Now, that may not be such a big step for me, but I recognize that there's lots of folks that is that's a big deal. It's a big deal. And so, this little the to me, the give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and these 2 copper coins, because those copper coins have Caesar's head on them too. They're directly connected. It's what are we able to do? And yes, that does mean that if we have more, that we're probably giving more. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we should have a parking place, or have to engrave our names. I get it. People donate buildings, and you want to be on the med schools, you want to have the Eye Institute. I get all that stuff, and I'm not hammered on it. I just don't. Sometimes I think that we get a little bit carried away with it, but it is very effective, though. And a lot of folks have perfectly to. It helps them have ownership. It helps them to have investment. It helps them to know that their legacy, that their contribution matters. I think there's all kinds of ways to be able to justify it. I just think that sometimes we get really carried away. Okay, is this 10% of my take home? Is this 10% of what I got as a whole? Or, okay, I can't give it like I used to. I'm going to have to back down because of financial crisis. But when I'm able later on, after I get out of this, then I'll be able to give to what's more, to what I really want to be able to give. And to me, it's all about what's in our heart. Why is it that we give what we give? Why is it that we do what we do? It's back to that same story about the landowner and the tenant farmers. That landowner has a lot of trust in those people that he turns over his property to. And he can turn over his property. He can do anything. He can have that managed any way he wants to. And yet he chooses those specific people. It's kind of a privilege, kind of an honor to have that opportunity. But that's not the way that those people, that the tenant farmers, it's not the way that they treated the property. They treated it like it was, like they deserved it, or that it was something that they were supposed to have, rather than something that they were allowed to have, or blessed to have. So Very good stuff in chapter 12. And we, of course, jumped around a little bit. There's some great stories in this. And so, as you're kind of looking at it, we'll be talking about this on Sunday. We'll be streaming live at 10 a.m. Eastern time, of course. Of course, I'll be in a different room in the church, but we'll be all there together again. There's a couple of other really good stories in here. And so, if you haven't had a chance to read chapter 12, take a look at it. And as you take a look at it, remember a couple of things. That this is taking place in Holy Week, which is the last week of Jesus's life leading up to his crucifixion. We think that these stories that we just read, and then the next one as well, paying the imperial tax and then the marriage at the resurrection, we believe that these are taking place at the temple, most likely Tuesday, maybe even Wednesday of Holy Week. And so it helps me sometimes to kind of have that timing correct. Okay, these are really Jesus's sort of last opportunities to share wisdom and to share insight in what it means to be a person of God. And so anyway, as you look at that, I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. But next week we will be in chapter 13 of Mark, and look forward to that. That's a good one too. There's lots of that one's more difficult. It talks about a little bit of end time sort of things, and so we will address that. That's stuff that normally in the church I avoid because I don't like telling bad stories or making people upset. The thing about it is in Bible study, we can explore them because we have more time. You're not like watching your clock to make sure that I'm off in 20 minutes. Because at church, if I'm not off in 20 minutes, people like stretching and getting up and, tying their shoes and checking their phones. So, but a Bible study, I can get by with an hour. We can talk about it and ask questions. And so 13, again, is in Holy Week. Jesus kind of gets serious with things and says, hey, listen, because there's some things coming up and y'all need to be aware of them. About how this situation plays out, because the landowner, if we keep on keeping on and we're not being trustworthy, we're not being honorable, the flip side isn't good and is not helpful. We want to be on that good side. We want to be able to do what we're supposed to do in the eyes of the Lord. And so we'll take a look at that. So thank y'all for joining me, and thank you for taking the time to be with us. I'm not surprised we have a small group tonight, but I'm very thankful for that. And this has been recorded as such as the previous ones have as well. If you want to rewatch this one, or if you want to look at any of those in the past, they are available on our web. You just go to our website, and there's a little YouTube button in the top right-hand corner of the website, and you just press that button, and it's going to take you straight to all of these Bible studies. They're on our YouTube channel. And so if you'd like to look at the previous ones, and that would be great. And same thing with our sermons. So we'll be preaching this Sunday in Mark chapter 12. I look forward to sharing the word of God with you then. So until then, y'all take care. Be good. If you're cleaning up, be careful cleaning up because it's dangerous. This mud is slippery. I fall fairly often, but I bounce. I still bounce pretty well. So far I keep bouncing up, but anyway, all
Pastor,
is good.
can we say happy birthday to Marita?
Is today Marita's birthday?
Happy birthday, Marita.
Oh, happy birthday. That's wonderful. Thank you for joining us on your birthday. Oh my goodness. Well, congratulations. What a great day it is. Happy birthday. Yes, love and kisses to you. Thank you for sharing your birthday with us. So, all right. Well, thank y'all so much. Y'all be safe, be careful. We'll talk to you again soon. God bless.
Thank you.